Here's another example of factoring by grouping. So this time we're going to factor 2x cubed minus x squared y cubed plus 8xy minus 4y to the fourth. Now, just like before, okay, we're factoring by grouping, so we're going to group these two guys together and then these two guys together, and then separately factor this mini algebraic expression here using the greatest common factor, and then do the same thing again over here. Factor with the greatest common factor. So if we start doing that, let's go ahead and look at these one at a time. 2x cubed minus x squared y cubed. Okay, what's the greatest common factor of that algebraic expression there? Well, here's a 2. There's no number here, so that just means 1. Okay, if there's nothing in front there, that just means 1. So there's no greatest common factor for that, it's just 1. Okay. And what about x cubed and x squared y cubed? What about, so the greatest common factor for the coefficients is just 1, so we don't have to write anything down yet. And what about the variable part? Well, here's an x cubed, here's x squared y cubed. So the greatest common factor for the variable part is just x squared. And remember, for the numbers, for the coefficients, it was just 1. So 1 times x squared is just x squared. Now, what if we use that to actually factor? Well, then what? So x squared, what do we have left over from 2x cubed? What we end up with is 2x. If we pull an x squared out of y cubed, what do we have left over? A y cubed. Okay, so if we come back up here, then what we can say is, so far, 2x cubed minus x squared y cubed plus 8xy minus 4y to the fourth, so far we know that equals x squared times the quantity 2x minus y cubed. Okay, then plus sign here translates to a plus sign over here. Now we have to figure out what is this when we factor that using the greatest common factor. So let's go ahead and do that. So 8xy minus 4y to the fourth. What's the greatest common factor there? Well, let's look at the coefficients, 8 and 4. Okay, so the greatest common factor between 8 and 4 is 4. And here's an xy, here's a y to the fourth. So an x over here, no x over here, so we get nothing from that, just a 1 basically. And then here's a y and here's a y to the fourth. So the greatest common factor for the variable part is y. Okay, y here, y to the fourth here, so 4y altogether is the greatest common factor for this algebraic expression. And again, we're skipping some of the details because just in the interest of saving time, and we did talk about all the details in the previous videos. So anyway, if we factor out the 4y, then what's going to be left over? What do we have when we factor, or in other words, divide? Remember, factoring is just dividing. So if we pull a 4y out of the 8xy, what's left over? Well, pull the 4 out of the 8, we get a 2 left over. Pull a y out of xy, we have x left over. Minus sign, minus sign. If we pull a 4 out of 4, we just have a 1. So let's not write anything yet. If we pull a y out of y to the fourth, we have a y cubed left over. Okay, so now we can come back up here and finish this. So we know that 2x cubed minus x squared y cubed, that became x squared times the quantity 2x minus y cubed, once we factored that using the greatest common factor. Now that we factored this using greatest common factor, we have 4y times the quantity 2x minus y cubed. And just like in the previous example, notice that we have the exact same thing in the parentheses here. 2x minus y cubed, 2x minus y cubed. And again, when you factor by grouping, that's what's supposed to happen. If that doesn't happen, then something went wrong. Okay, so let's separate this off here. Now, one last step to do, remember a common factor here. So we have two terms. Here's one term here, x squared times the quantity 2x minus y cubed. Here's another term here, 4y times the quantity 2x minus y cubed. So these two terms have a factor in common. It's this quantity 2x minus y cubed. So we're going to pull that common factor out, and what's left over? Well, this x squared is left over. This plus 4y is left over. So that entire quantity, okay, be careful about that, that entire quantity is multiplied by the quantity 2x minus y cubed. Okay, again, because we have a common factor of 2x minus y cubed, we just pulled it out, we factored it, we divided by it, and when we did that, our result was x squared plus 4y. That's what we hit. That's what we get when we factor this 2x minus y cubed out. Okay, so what we just found out was when we factor 2x cubed minus x squared y cubed plus 8xy minus 4y to the fourth, we factor that by grouping, what we get is the quantity x squared plus 4y times the quantity 2x minus y cubed.